This is the Lift Your Legacy podcast with your host, Jacob Rupp. Today, I am thrilled to be welcoming on a dear mentor and close friend of mine, Rabbi Shalom Garfinkel, who is the director and founder of the newly launched Project 613, a young professionals Jewish organization based out of downtown Chicago. It is just launched, and we're very excited and want to wish you a lot of hatzlacha and tremendous success in your new venture. Rabbi Garfinkel, what's going on?
Thank you, Jacob, very much. What a privilege and honor to be with you in this amazing podcast.
Okay.
As my home phone starts ringing.
Fantastic. It's a never dull moment. Rabbi, tell us a little bit about, I know you grew up or you had some experience in California. Just tell us a little bit about, how you got to where you are as an all-star in the rabbinical world.
Well, I reject the all-star comment, but I will tell you how I grew up. Fun story. I was a California kid. I grew up in a small town called San Francisco, actually north of San Francisco, Marin County. You know that thing, the Golden Gate Bridge? Well, there's actually a life on the other end of that, okay? Marin County, California. My father was an executive for many years at the Fairmont Hotel.
Wow.
And our non-kosher Shabbos dinners many times Friday night were at the Fairmont. But grew up, I would say an average Jewish American family. Being Jewish was important to us. We didn't do that much, but we did like the major holidays, Passover, Hanukkah, high holidays for sure. But, definitely being secular success was paramount. Sports, academics, all very important. Two older sisters. I still have two older sisters. My eldest went to Brown University. My middle went to Wharton undergrad, University of Pennsylvania. And then they were not going to outdo me. So my male ego made me work very hard, and I went to Stanford.
Nice.
And I joked with my parents that those were three of the most expensive bumper stickers in the world. Like, they're really thin, they're not so big, but each one of those, that plastic was like really expensive for them to put those bumper stickers on their car. And very interesting enough, went to Sunday school, was very dedicated to it, and went on a 16-year-old trip after confirmation. Those people not in the Reform movement, but after there was a confirmation, we got a trip to Israel. This is talking decades before birthright, 1989. Anyway, there's numerous ways to say a long story short, but basically it sort of opened my eyes to Israel, that there's more to Judaism that I had known even existed in my wildest imagination. Went back to high school, APs, SATs, 3 sports, theater, the whole thing, community service, padding my resume, SATs, got into Stanford. And finally I said, when I get to college at Stanford, I think, our world really pumps up college. Like, it's going to be, as I would say in Hebrew, Gan Eden, or in English, the Garden of Eden. Oh, you made it to Stanford. It's going to be amazing. Everything's so excited. So I sort of put all my questions about life on hold, because isn't that what you do in college? Don't you just, stay up to 3 a.m. and talk about philosophy and the meaning and why am I on God's green earth? And then I found out that I was staying up to 3 a.m, but it was because of organic chemistry and not discussing the great issues of life. And I will say an amazing, something, and not to speak particularly negative, I think it would have been at pretty much any college, maybe more so at Stanford, was that at Stanford there was excellence all around you. I had an Olympic swimmer in my dorm and a football player and a guy who started his own company, and everyone was excellent. And yet I looked around and I had this gnawing question that would just not leave me alone. And it was a very practical question. And it was, I have this thing called a life. What am I supposed to do with it? And it wasn't a philosophical question of, it was a very practical one. In other words, if I'm investing this much energy to be a pre-med, to work this hard, to achieve, to be a doctor, if I fast forward my life, what's it going to get me? I'm going to repeat the wealth my parents made. And then what? What will the sum total of my efforts on planet Earth have been? So I started going to my University Stanford professors and asking them this question. And it was an amazing, amazing thing. None of them had an answer. But that didn't necessarily bother me as much as the fact that I realized that they had never asked the questions themselves.
Sorry to interrupt you. How could you tell that they never asked the questions themselves?
Deer in headlights. Absolutely deer in headlights. It was like from left field. It was almost like from Mars. And these were an English professor, a biology professor. The original PhD, I don't know if your listeners know, is a doctor of philosophy. Someone gets a PhD in English and get a PhD in chemistry. Theoretically, they're all going towards this Greek ideal of truth. Okay, but one's going from the angle of chemistry and one going from the angle of English or biology or whatever. But they all should be able to discuss larger truths together, just from different angles. Those professors, literally, the only thing they can talk about is sports and which coffee they like. They're so specialized. Okay, that's off topic, but the point was that no matter which angle I looked, I sensed very clearly that they had not asked that question. And it dawned on me that some of my professors, you could be a Nobel Prize winner. You could have tenure. You could be successful financially. You could have people stand up for you, walk in the room. You could even make amazing contributions to society by finding out the cure to some disease, but have no fundamental organizing principle about what you're doing in this world.
I wanted to ask, do you think that that's a gnawing problem that they had, or is there something unique about you or your background that led you to this problem?
Jacob, as I work with my young students, I sometimes, and I do meet someone like this, and I look at them like, wait, where are those people plagued? That I was plagued with, right. Not that I was special. I think that Hashem, that God hardwires everyone to either be more or less sensitive to it. But I think that everyone, no matter what their life path is, encounters certain transitional times or times of challenge where they're forced to ask this question, be it a sickness, be it a sour relationship, be it a dysfunctional family member, whatever it is, these stresses force us to focus on, hey, what is my life all about? What's all about? And then that's the challenge of every human being, to be able to say, wait a minute, let me use this painful situation as a pause to think, well, what is it all about? And that's where I think everyone has the opportunity, even if they're not necessarily hardwired to be walking around, hey, what am I here for? But they have an opportunity to really plug into that and do some reflection about, what am I doing here on God's green earth?
So do you advise people, because obviously those kind of gnawing questions do pop up at moments of uncertainty, or again, interestingly enough, it sounds like for you, there really wasn't a moment of uncertainty. It was just that you had come from a family that had already achieved a lot of the parameters of success that other
right.
people had, and you were around others and had sort of seen that there was a superficiality about their existence. So it wasn't like you had some existential crisis, but when you're dealing with people who are good, like they're just kind of living life and going through life, and you can't necessarily preempt that kind of a crisis. Do you try to advise them just that when the crisis comes, like that's when you should start really pushing and asking these questions? Or how do you advise people to take that step if the step is not something that is kind of inherent in everybody, but just sort of is circumstantial?
Well, it's a great question, Jacob. And to be really honest, one is only investigating one's life or ask this question, when crises happen, that's like the alarm clock going off. That's the danger sign going off. The ideal is, when I go through my whole life every day, what's it all about? It doesn't mean that I can't go to work and put in 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours of work. We're not a cave religion. This is not the point of what I'm telling you is not that you have to go meditate on a mountain in Tibet somewhere. But the point is that fundamentally at no point do you not think or consider about what's the big picture over here and what are we really doing? Then that's the danger of going through an entire life. So obviously you don't want to wait till a tragedy or a crisis happens. But I was just saying, that was my way of saying that those are opportunities. Whereas people say, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, who says it's bad? We don't invite pain on ourselves. In fact, in Judaism, we pray 3 times a day for money, for health, for world peace. We want all good stuff to happen. But the point is, these are opportunities when there's challenge. So no, obviously, as a rabbi to my students, I push them all the time proactively. What are you doing? You're successful. What's it all about? What exactly are you doing? So obviously we want to be proactive. I was just saying that in difficult times, it's a unique opportunity that opens people up who don't have this natural proclivity or propensity that they can tap into these questions.
One other question before we get back to your personal story.
Yeah.
When you are asking these kind of questions, and they are very awkward, because what ultimately you're asking someone to do is to walk outside of their comfort zone after they've established themselves as successful in a variety of areas. A lot of us are looking for, that, I don't want to say plateau, but a place by which I start to feel comfortable in a relationship, in a job. I have a little bit of status, I have money, save, whatever it might be. And here comes the pesky rabbi essentially saying that everything that you have been doing and are doing, you're not saying it's bad, but that you should be putting yourself in a perpetual state of discomfort, because who could really say that I'm like living every, day to its fullest and like what I'm really meant to do. So how do you sort of like cushion the ego and sort of massage a person out of that comfort zone in order to be able to ask these kind of questions and be okay with the answer?
Well, a great question, Jacob. And the goal of any educator is not to necessarily break someone down. I know there's the, United States Army and all armies, they break a person down to the fraternities. But the point is that everyone understands the basic principle of no pain, no gain. If people want to shirk responsibility or shirk any hard work, then no good results going to come out of it. We have an entire culture that's dedicated to working very hard. But what I do is I try to challenge them, apply and direct those same efforts and dedication that you do to run a triathlon. Do you know how, Jacob, many of my students have become triathletes now? And I have no particular problem with people doing triathlons, but I think it's a response to a deeper yearning to achieve something greater in life. And so I said, it's not about setting them up for constant pain, but it's, if we don't identify and come to terms with what our greater purpose in this world is, then all of our efforts are going to be ultimately lead to feelings of frustration and emptiness. So it's not like I'm saying beat your head against the wall. I'm saying apply your same level of tenacity to a little bit to the spiritual realm. What does it mean that I have a soul? What does it mean that I am a soul? What does it mean that my relationship with God? And therefore, those questions are important to ask, even if they're uncomfortable, because training for a triathlon is also uncomfortable. Just as we push ourselves in the physical realm, but we know it's worth it. My job is to be that spiritual coach for my students, and hopefully for myself as well, to push ourselves in the spiritual realm to say, hey, push yourself. Because ultimately, if you don't get this down, then you might just wander through your existence on planet Earth. And that's really sad.
This is how you know it's going well, because we are getting back to the personal question. But when you're coaching someone, and I also do coaching, and in the weight loss world, and the fitness world, and in the business coaching world, all of the the premier question that you want to ask is, what's your goal, or how do we define success, so that we can assert that this relationship is A, that the relationship's going well, and B, that you are, getting to that marker. And one of the major challenges is in business, is in fitness, that you're able to see, I can lift a little bit more weight than I used to. I could, I'm losing weight. I'm making more money. I'm bringing more people on my team. And when it comes to spirituality, how do you assign, is it realistic to assign benchmarks? Is it a feeling that you have, or are you advocating, like, how do you advocate in the realm of using that coaching analogy? How do you advocate for, discernible growth in the area of spirituality?
Right. So basically, Jacob, you just took us, even though we're in July, you took us to December, because that's really the question that the Greeks had. And this was the Battle of Hanukkah. The Greeks were very focused on the only thing that exists is that which I can touch. They're very much in the body. And architecture and form and things that were tangible. Even their conceptions of God were very human-like, with their own foibles, etc. But the Jews said, no, we're in the physical world. We use the physical world, but the best things aren't necessarily physical. By the way, the scientists, I remember back in college, there was a certain period where they were looking for the hormone combination that was love, that created the feelings of love. So I don't know what progress they made, but that's a Greek exercise, because Greece cannot fathom that everyone knows love exists. But if I can't have a formula for it, then in my worldview it doesn't exist. But Jews have no problem with that. So the answer is like this. Of course, there's certain metrics. But honestly, I have found that sort of, coaching young Jews, and I know this podcast is for Jews and non-Jews, but whoever's on their own spiritual journey, I'll just speak in my own familiar language with who I, coach and who I, try to mentor, is that when people get plugged into their Jewish values and their Jewish traditions, there is a palpable feeling among them that when I go to work from 8 to 8 or 8 to 6 or 9 to 5, that there's something more than that. And not only there's something more than that, but that the hours that I'm there are much more pleasurable. Okay, why? Because this isn't just my life. I can compartmentalize it. Work is something that I do. It's not who I am, because I am someone who has a connection with God. I am someone who can shut it all off for 25 hours and plug into my relationship with Hashem, with God, with my family. And so therefore, I've heard countless times, what would I do without the Sabbath? Rabbi, what would I do? And I said, I don't know. I don't remember what it's like not living without a full Sabbath. But so obviously there's certain metrics, in terms of, what I try to coach them in terms of this, within Jewish observance. And, these are the people who've already bought into the package and, Rabbi, how do I grow? And then for people who haven't, bought the package of, being an observant Jew, it's about, let's do a little more, be a little better. Just as you push yourself running, let's push yourself in terms of, okay, so you learned 30 minutes of Torah this week, learn 35 next week. Or, instead of doing Shabbos once a quarter, do Shabbos once a month, something like that. So it's a balance. There are certain metrics, but the ultimate thing is really having that feeling of, connection, that my life has meaning and purpose. And that helps the days go by in a very meaningful way, and the life go by in a meaningful way.
Tremendous. So you brought a tremendous existential crisis to the professors at Stanford University. Then what happened?
Okay, so then what happened was I finally realized after in the middle of my sophomore year, I called my parents up. Now, again, all your Jewish listeners or viewers will understand this. My name for the first 19, 20 years of life was my son, the doctor. Okay. Oh, there goes my son, the doctor. Okay. Every Jewish child needs to make that. The default setting of a Jewish child is he's a doctor. Okay. And then the question becomes, are you going to fulfill that? So I realized that medicine really wasn't where I wanted to be. Yeah. Okay. I realized that medicine really wasn't where I wanted to be. But that led to a real question. Oh my gosh, my whole life I wanted to be a doctor. So what do I do now? And so I told my parents I'm not going to be a doctor, and they, swallowed it. And then they thought I'd come to my sanity, and I didn't. So that summer, I actually got a White House internship. It was Bill Clinton's first summer of his presidency in 1993. It was still when it was reputable to be a White House intern, 2 years before someone else came along. And
I think she ruined it for everybody.
Yeah, I know. It used to be really good for like 2 years on the resume. And then it was like scandalous. And that summer, before the summer went, my dad and I, we had a long talk, and he said, look, my son, I love you. I just, I don't want to spend $30,000 at Stanford for you to not to know what you want to do. And that was reasonable. So find out what you want to do.
I would say that's not reasonable. I would say that's unbelievably heroic for your father. No, honestly, can you imagine? I mean, I was just speaking to someone yesterday that was saying that, the parents are always pushing for that stability, and it's just so crippling for people, to say it's not working, but it's not stable. So I think that's an amazing step on your father's part in terms of embracing, both what makes financial sense, obviously, which I think very few parents actually realize, because they just feel like if they keep paying for it, eventually you'll work yourself out of the craziness, but also to kind of embrace you to take your own step. That's amazing.
Jacob, I have to tell you, I've told this story several times over the years, and I thank you for pointing that out. I really should give my father tremendous credit for that. It really was a strong and clarifying statement. So thank you for pointing that out. I can honor my father better now because of this podcast. So thank you. But I took that mission that I was going to go to DC and find out what I wanted to do back at Stanford. And I happened to meet a young group of Orthodox guys, and I'd never met anyone like this. Grew up in a nice Reformed temple in San Francisco. And these were guys with really good internship, smart, well put together, well dressed. Like, the only difference between them and me is they had yarmulkes on and I didn't. Back then, I had a little more on top. So whatever it was, But that notwithstanding, I was very impressed. I always thought that if you like being Jewish, you got to go be a rabbi. And these guys proved that you don't have to be a rabbi if you like being Jewish. You could just be a dedicated, observant Jew. And so basically it became clear that summer that Stanford could not offer me what I wanted out of life. And I needed to go to Israel to learn Torah. So I called my parents up. It was probably the most difficult phone call I've ever made. I said, Mom, Dad, I love you. You know how I'm doing more Jewish stuff. You know how Staford, your dad, you said I should find out. Well, I found out what I want to do. And I want to drop out of Stanford and go learn Torah and yeshiva in Israel.
I feel like for a lot of parents, like that is literally the worst possible call you could get.
Yeah, well, there were several comments posted like, my mom tried to, they tried to comfort each other. Says, well, at least he's not on drugs. There could be so many worse things. So anyway, again, in the context of a secular American Jewish family, that's literally having the Holy Grail in your hands and jettisoning it, throwing it away. So thank God.
And just to now as a parent yourself can I know how many kids do you have?
Thank God. We just had our 8th.
Okay. Wow. Mazel tov. There you go.
7 girls and 1 boy. And thank God. A beautiful, wonderful family. Very blessed. Okay.
So now that you are a father many times over and having seen both sides of that world, and you said yourself that your parents certainly raised you with a profound sense of pride that you were Jewish and, was not ashamed, wasn't hiding it. Why do you think that exists? And I'm sure you've seen this in a lot of your students also, but why is it such a nightmare when the kid says, okay, I want to learn Torah on a serious matter? I'd venture to say that if you had realized you wanted to be a Reform rabbi, I mean, even myself, I was going to be a Reform rabbi, and that was not controversial and great. Okay, my son's not going to be a doctor, but he's going to be a Reform rabbi. And all of a sudden you're going to Jerusalem to learn Torah. What's that going to get you? Why is there that resistance amongst parents?
It's a good question. I think honestly, and I think things are changing now, but certainly from, the beginning of the 19th century through the early 2000s, I think things are starting to change now. There was such an emphasis on assimilation that the PR and marketing for the Orthodox world was miserable. It was terrible. I grew up in, San Rafael, California, thinking that Orthodox Jews were mean and they were not nice to their wives and they're barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen and they were all, ugly and, literally terrible because I'd never seen them, So I think a lot of it is honestly the fear of the unknown. I think if I would have told them I was going to go do, Tibetan monk training, they would have had a similarly horrific, response to that. So I think things have changed certainly in the last, certainly 10 years, if not 15 years, that being involved in Torah study, being involved in more observant practices is not voodoo. These are the classic, time-tested, Jewish people approved principles and guidelines of living that have been so successful for so many thousands of years for millions of Jews. So I think that's changing. One quick note about, just in terms of you asking me being a parent, it's kind of funny. My daughters bring home their report cards and they have to beg me to look at them. They have to beg me to look at them because it was so much all about that. I said, I'm not going to, and so they said, Abu, will you please look at the report? I said, listen, I have one question for you. Did you try your hardest? They said, of course you did. I said, great. Why do I need to see them? So, okay, please look. So I look, whatever. But maybe it's just, thank God we've been blessed with wonderful children, but they've all done well. But I think it's important for all parents out there to emphasize the effort. Obviously, your child needs help in school, and there's tutors and whatever, but the pressure of the secular world that your grades are your identity is really really, I think, very toxic. But
I completely agree. No, it's true. And I'm even worse that in the sense that I don't push my kids school wise at all because, to work it out with my wife, and she does kind of do that, but, and wishes that I did it a little bit more, but I completely agree that I spent so many years of my childhood, like prepping for this, big test in this big college. And I hated that. And it's something that for my children, I want them to associate school with being positive and low pressure. And I don't, even if it's slow, I feel like the way that the world works now, you don't have to have all these technical, I realized I was trying to like write a handwritten letter to someone. I can't spell anymore. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, but you can't tell because you don't need necessarily that kind of stuff. So it's scary in a lot of ways to try to give that message to your children. But at the same time, I think that, yeah, we do definitely, someone like you and myself, Northern California, upper middle class, Jewish family, to really emphasize that school doesn't matter so much. And I think that is an important trend that we push. Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, no, 100%. So, okay, fast forwarding, I spent a year there. A year wasn't enough. 2 years at this point, my parents thought I wasn't coming back. Thank God I did come back after the second year, finished Stanford. Thank God for all those AP credits. I was able to finish in a year. So total of 3 years at Stanford. 5 years from the beginning with 2 years in Israel. And then I went to yeshiva or Sameach. And that led to the rest of my life. I was there for 2 years in the center program. It was the first year of that program, which is sort of like the yuppie yeshiva program. After 2 years of that, my wife and I met, got married. We spent 6 married years in Israel. We then decided after 6 years married in Israel to return to UCLA. Went back to UCLA. I had 3.5 children at the time. My wife, we were pregnant at the time. And we lived with students in the middle of UCLA apartments. And it was quite a 3 years.
2 quick questions for you. One of the questions that oftentimes is asked is like, what are you studying for so long? Like you're in yeshiva. So you spend a total of 10 years in full-time Torah study.
Yeah.
Why? Or what did you get? Like, that's like, you did, it's like a doctor or something like that. Like what were you doing? When did you figure out you had enough? And subsequently, and a second question is, when you were, as far as I know, your wife grew up Orthodox, correct?
Yes.
So was that a big pitch to be like, hey, let's move to, Westwood, California and hang out on Frat Row? Like, what would you think about that? Those 2 questions.
Good questions. The first question was about the length of study. And, I had a joke with my mom. She's like, are you done yet? It's like, oh, Mom, I'm about at 5th grade now. And, a few months later, she said, are you done yet? Oh, I just moved into 6th grade, And, there's a lot of makeup time to do. And especially, for a Jewish man, the study of the Gemara of Talmud is particularly difficult. And it just takes a time to really get acclimated to what that means. And the language is actually the easiest part of it. The language is actually not so hard, relatively speaking, to the logic and the holding several ideas in your head simultaneously. So getting that down, I'm not sure you ever get it down. You just get increasing levels of more proficient at it. Does take a while. The last 2 years were specifically with rabbinic training vis-a-vis getting what's called smicha, which is, rabbinic ordination. So that takes time. And there's different levels of rabbinic ordination. I just got the basic, standard rabbinic, but you can get rabbinically ordained in many areas of Jewish law.
After 10 years of hardcore study. I mean, that's the thing that's like so cool is that, you're like a white belt rabbi, so to speak, and you've spent 10 years, which puts you, at the black belt of the black belt of what any, normal rabbinic school is. And that's just such a paradigm shift for so many people,
100%, 100%. And, I say to my students all the time, why are you a successful lawyer, doctor, architect, marketing person? Because you got a good Jewish cup. A cup is a head in Yiddish. So you have a good Jewish head. And why? Because we've been studying intensely for 3,329 years. You've inherited those genes. So, buddy, have some respect, for the tradition, So
you had to pitch your wife, but I think you had told me a story one time about also why you made the decision to go out to UCLA. Do you recall that story?
Well, let me tell you quickly about my wife. So I did, in terms of my wife. So when we were dating, she actually had wanted to stay in Israel pretty much. And I said, look, I have my mission, my destiny. I want to go back and I felt I had certain God-given abilities to relate to schmooze, schmoozer. And I want to use those schmoozing skills for the sake of heaven. And I really did want to give back and try to find people like me and impact them who didn't have the benefit of a robust Jewish education. Although I am still obviously very grateful for the positive, very positive, strong Jewish identity that I did get, but really to take it to the next level and offer that to, my future students. And that was a real burning passion of mine. And she was okay with that, but she knew right in the dating that the time in Israel was going to end. But we had a good 6-year run of that. And, my wife's family is also very mixed. She has non-observant relatives. So she was very comfortable, familiar in all environments. So it worked out really, really amazingly.
Beautiful.
And then you asked me another question, which
I did. You told a story about you gave credit to my wife, how she met you on one of those trips. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I do. I actually do. This was it. So we went out to UCLA, and at the time, man plans and God's laughs is a Yiddish expression, translated to English, of course. And I had wanted to go out to a certain type of Jewish outreach. I was not going to go back to campus. Campus was already too much. I was going to go back. And so what happened was I did a first pilot trip of 2 places that were ideal for me. And here I am, in my mind, the NBA lottery pick, first round draft choice coming out. I got my secular Stanford degree. I got my schmoozing abilities. They're both going to give me offers, and I'll just have to decide which city. And guess what? I didn't get an offer from either city.
No, I can't believe that. That's crazy.
Either city. And I want you to know it was a wake-up call.
Oh, my goodness.
Such a humbling experience. This is something I had worked for, dreamed, planned. And as a footnote to the story, one of the guys from one of the cities came to me years later. He's like, I can't believe I didn't hire you. My male ego was stroked when he said that. But okay, that one was sitting. So I went out to UCLA, and there was one Shabbos, and your wife was, the star student there. Really, just an amazing person. I could tell right away. A real deep person and positive and just amazing. Just like the host of the show.
Yeah,
guys, a very good match. And I still was debating, am I really going to do this campus thing? Am I not going to do this campus thing? I'm dragging my children, my pure, holy children, back to the beer-soaked, balconies of UCLA. And so at the very, very end of the whole long Shabbaton weekend, Bracha Zeret, who I know we both have tremendous gratitude for, her and her husband lead a group called JAM, Jewish Awareness Movement in Los Angeles. Bracha asked all the students, tell the rabbis why they should come to UCLA. Or they're interviewing for many campuses. Tell the rabbis why they should come. And I remember your wife, she was turned on her side. Her elbow was over the couch, and she looked directly there was 3 rabbis at the panel. And she says something to the effect of, you guys have to come. She says, you guys have the ability to make a difference in these students' lives. And for you not to come is selfish. And when I heard that, I was like, boom, here's this girl who, I think was Shomer Shabbat at the time, maybe not. But she just laid it right between these 3 rabbis' eyes. And he says, if you have something to give and you have unique abilities to connect with these students in a way that no one else can or very few people can, then you're negligent. There's a lot of people, I'd say, say this not disparagingly. There's a lot of people who can learn coffee learnings with, lunch and learns with 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds. Like it's a little more, everyone's adults. They're more forgiving for foibles. It's harder to learn with 18 to 22-year-olds, and you got to be more attractive than whatever's going on, on the UCLA campus. So, which is almost impossible. So your wife gets a lot of credit from me. That was the final. Really, at that moment, I said, all right, we're going to do it. We're going to campus. And who knew 14 years later, I'd be on your podcast.
So yeah, definitely not me. So a few more questions. I want to be respectful of your time. The first question is, why do you feel now that young professionals is where your passion lies and where you can make the biggest impact with the Jewish people.
Right. So Jacob, if you go to a trade show of, computer geeks, they'll all say, oh, this language is better. And this is, so when you go to a trade show of outreach professionals, the whole conference is, well, college is better because they have more time. And then young professionals better. Well, they're more mature. But then the college will say, well, young professionals are already more set in their ways and they can't really make the growth thing. And then,
and then I'm teaching like high school now. And I'm like, what about the high school students? They're like, what, high school? Oh, I guess so. That's a good point.
Right. Obviously the general rule is the earlier you can impact someone, the better. That's the general rule. I'd say like this, it was a little bit situational in Chicago. Very interesting. Of all the towns that you think of being a college town, Chicago is not a college town. How do I explain this? Austin, Texas is a college town. Tucson, Arizona is a college town. Even UCLA is a city within a city. That area of UCLA, that is a college town. That was a whole college there. But in Chicago, they're, decent to good schools, DePaul and Loyola and, University of Chicago is an elite school down further south, and UIC that. But there's, in terms of the amount of Jews, there's 200 here, 300 here. You're talking about a tremendous amount of effort to try to extract of those 200 Jews at DePaul. How many really are going to be interested? 20, and of how many of them are going to be, so after a while, 3 years into teaching campus, and thank God we did great. We really did. Thank God, with a lot of Hashem's, God's blessing. I started to see young professionals in my college courses that I would teach in my Maimonides program. And I'd be like, you can come, but like, why are you here? And I would talk to them, and they would say the following, said, Rabbi, in all of downtown Chicago, no one's teaching these classes. I'm like, come on, give me a break. You've got to be kidding me. There was individual little, groups that were doing something, but there was nothing in terms of real Torah education, not treating them like, watered down Sunday school stuff, but learning text and learning, real Jewish sources, which is what I try to do. I very rarely lecture. I always try to make it like a Beit Midrash style. People are learning, and then we'll discuss in between. And I said, okay, great. They said to me, we gotta take this to our space. I said, fine. You recruit, I'll show up. So it wasn't that easy, as said, but easy as done. But on June 1st, 2010, we had a boardroom of Bank of America that we got through connections, and there were 20 young professionals, and that started what then was called Jet YP, and up through 7 years, we ran that program. And really saw that this academic debate, is it better for college students, better to do outreach young professionals? In Chicago, it was moot. You have thousands and thousands of Jewish young professionals every year. Imagine the Jewish graduates from University of Michigan, Indiana, Ohio State, Champaign-Urbana, Michigan State, you name all the Big Ten schools. Many of them, most of them are graduating and coming to downtown Chicago. And so it came to a certain point, a few years into it, about 2013, that I said, I can't keep doing campus and young professional. I got to go one or the other. And around 2013, I went full-time young professional and just finished up 7 amazing years with Jet YP. We, thank God, I feel impacted a lot of people. I was impacted deeply by the relationships. And now we're very excited to be, launching this new brand called Project 613 and focusing exclusively on young professionals. We want to, God willing, get a center downtown, have a place. We're going to have hundreds of people coming through every month and really making an imprint. As my guys in tech say, we want to be disruptive. I'm like, it's not nice to be disruptive. You can't be disruptive. What kind of character is that? Like, no, Rabbi, it's good to be disruptive. So Rabbi wants to be disruptive in downtown Chicago and really get all these young professionals, many of them, involved in connecting to their roots.
Beautiful. Two last questions. Question
Sure.
number one, in the course of your life or your rabbinic career, what do you find to be the greatest challenge, either a specific challenge you had or something that is ongoing that you work to overcome?
I would say it's the fact that people don't listen to me.
That's everybody's problem. I don't understand. Like, I don't know. It affects people out here also.
People don't listen to me enough. What do I tell you? You know, it comes up most in terms of trip recruiting. So imagine recruiting a 10-day trip for young professionals, okay? So this trip is bona fide, the most fun trip. It has zip lining, ATVing, Segway tours. We go to places that Birthright doesn't go to. I'm telling you, we have meaningful classes, but these are the people, I'm not even talking about a beginner for this show. I'm talking about people who are already into our learning, and we learn weekly. And I'm like, you're coming, right? They're like, no. I'm like, why not? Well, the hamana. Never said the hamana. Well, you know. and I would say, but you need it now. And there's always an excuse. So I find, honestly, and look, you know, if anyone wants to think that Orthodox Judaism is a cult, this is pure proof that if this was a cult, I would deprive them of protein and slip them something to drink and say, you're coming on the trip. But everyone has free will. And so I would say that's a great frustration. You know, the Talmud says an amazing thing. It says, more than the calf, more than the baby cow wants to suckle, right? The mother wants to feed her child. So in other words, if I'm the mother cow, that any teachers, when it gets over, there's a desire, you want to give over, you want your students to have that amazing experience. But at that time, they don't want to suckle. They don't want to take that. So I would say, honestly, that's the most frustrating thing. But thank God, we have years and years of people who have chosen to suckle. And it's not just for me. It's not my ego. Again, it's of the Torah, of those beautiful words and lessons, life lessons of meaning and purpose. And I guarantee every one of my students that if they invest, they will get many, many multiplied times back in investment. And no one has ever told me I'm wrong in that. So I would say that's the biggest frustration. But thank God, we do have a lot of wins. But in terms of being honest, in terms of frustrations, is many of my favorite students that I really want to have a certain experience, you know, find excuses not to. And God willing, one day hopefully they'll come around.
If you had to pick one teaching or one concept that you feel is most relevant or most amazing or most life-changing, some piece of Torah that you either teach or have been impacted by, what would you say that is?
Now, Jacob, hold on.
That's like when you ask, like, what kind of music you're like, what genre of music?
Hold on. For the people watching on video, sorry for the audio podcast, personal foul, unnecessary rabbinic roughness, 15-yard penalty.
I still quote the personal career fouls. I love that. That's awesome. You're the best.
Okay. The only question is which one. I would say something that's actually very powerful, that is sort of a life mantra. And for those people, I'd say in the Orthodox world, it almost cliche at this point, but certainly I think your listeners would benefit. And I think even those people who are observant would benefit. Is there's a beautiful statement that says, Ein devar omed bifnei haratzon, which means nothing stands in the way of your will. If you want something, Hashem says, I'm going to guide you in that path. Okay, now, so that's a very powerful thing. But the caveat to that expression, that life lesson, is you got to be careful what you want. What do you want? And I think this is a nice way to tie in from the beginning of the whole session, because that was my question that was aching me. What do I want? What should I want? What should I want out of life? And I feel so blessed that Hashem, that God tapped me on the shoulder, as one of my rabbis said, grabbed me by the back of my neck and stuck me down in yeshiva, is that I got those answers. And it doesn't mean that life is easy but I have the tools to be able to deal with all the challenges, because that's what the Torah gives. The Torah is a toolbox for life. It's a GPS and a toolbox. And so, Ein devar omed bifnei haratzon, there's nothing that stands in the way of one's will. Hashem will guide you wherever you want to go. You just got to be careful what you choose. And I feel that the more we educate people of what the Torah says, and their desire is going to be to go in that way.
Beautiful. How do people find out more about you, about Project 613? How do we find you? How do we find the
Thank you
project?
so much. Yes, we get referrals all the time, even from people living out of state. Usually it's from Jewish mothers. Rabbi, my son, please, he's dating a non-Jewish girl. You got to get him a nice Jewish girl. Rabbi, please. But friends or whatever, please. So the best way, honestly, I know we're not in a phone thing, but I will give out my cell phone. It'll sound familiar to you, Jacob. It's a UCLA number, 310.
Wow.
903-7398. I'll repeat it, 310-903-7398. My email is rabbi, that's R-A-B-B-I, shalom, S-H-A-L-O-M, and then my first letter of the last name, G, at Gmail. Rabbi Shalom G at gmail.com. It's not live yet, but very soon you can go to project613.com. project613.com. Also, I'm Shalom Garfinkel on Facebook. And Jacob, I just have to thank you. This was a beautiful, it's always great to talk to you and what you're doing for the Jewish people and for the world with this podcast and every other great activity that you're doing to help people. It was really a privilege to be interviewed, and I certainly gained more than you did by interviewing. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Good luck with the new project.
Amen. Thank you. You too.